So if everybody's under a significant amount of pressure, the killer question for us is, why are you still using traditional forecast-driven MRP? This is kind of the standout question, because when you start looking, as some of you will have done already, when you start looking into some of the root causes of some of the pressures that you are facing in the supply chain, be that your excess stock, your increasing stock levels, your lack of service level, your capacity issues, some of them, the problems are rooted within the fundamental design of the traditional tools that we've been using for the last 10 or 20 years. Certainly in the era of the ERP environments, we've been using, whichever ERP brand you've been using, we've been using traditional MRP tools. So the question today, and this is if you're in a business, if you're in a supply chain today, this is the fundamental question you need to ask yourself. If I'm still using those traditional tools, why am I doing that? Because, put very, very bluntly, there is an alternative. And fortunately, in this conference, that's what the alternative is all about. So, let's imagine that we've asked that question and we've said, okay, I understand the root causes of the problems, I recognise the symptoms, I've got those symptoms, and I recognise that these objectives and these problems, I can do something about them. So what do I do? We start looking now inside the corporate environment, and I'll start, there's no particular sequence here, but I'll just start with IT. When you're talking to a corporation, there will be an IT department, there will be a corporate IT department, and inevitably there will be standards there. There will be some policies and standards that corporate IT have decided. And becoming demand-driven probably isn't on the radar yet for many of those. So that's the first sort of thing to recognise. You may have somebody in the organisation, it was myself in Shell, who's saying, let's go demand-driven. You look inside your ERP system, and until very, very recently, there were no ERP systems that supported this. So you instantly hit a bit of an issue. Of the ERP environment itself that you may have, it varies from corporation to corporation. Some corporations, like Shell, had a single ERP. They had an SAP, singular ERP across the whole of the network. That's difficult in some respects because it's hard to make change happen on a global scale in a single instance, but it's great because if you can make the change, it happens very quickly across the globe because you only have to build things one time. So think interfaces, think in infrastructure, you only have to do it at one time. But many companies are not single instance, they are multiple instance. And then they are sometimes, and quite often, not even multiple instances of the same application. Across a lot of multinational companies, they are the product of a history of acquisition, of company acquisition, company merger, where you've got JD Edwards in one place that's working with an Oracle in another place, that's working with a SAP in another place, and there's usually a horrific sort of network of mashing that together through business warehouses and other planning tools, and planning generally ends up in here, hiding underneath here, Excel. Most planning tends to end up there because it's difficult to do it. It's difficult to do it in multiple applications, but it's also difficult to do it in even a single application if it's not providing all the information that you need. In companies, you'll get the theme of my graphics here on some of these. In a lot of companies, the ERP strategy has a monopoly on all that should happen in that company. If you want to do something, please make sure you do it in the ERP. That has traditionally been the ethos, certainly through my early years in Shell and in all of my time in GSK Pharmaceuticals, which was prior to Shell. It was ERP first. If you want to do anything, we want the benefit back out of the ERP, do the stuff you need to do in the ERP. I'm glad to say, and Shell took this leap, both with demand-driven and previously with demand sensing, that maybe not everything has to happen in the ERP. Maybe there's some merit in taking best of breed or things you need to do and do them outside of ERP. Because the thought of making some of these changes solely in your ERP environment is, for a lot of companies, really quite unpalatable, quite scary. Why? Because changing your ERP, it took us 8 years to put the thing in. Why would I change it now? Why would I want to fiddle around with the ERP? It's good at what it does. There's a backbone, there's a transactional backbone, a finance backbone in the ERP. But to change that, to get another module, to update your ERP, just to get a planning thing, in my experience, you never sell that to the company. You're not going to change your ERP to plan differently. It's never going to fly. But the good news is, certainly over the last 4 or 5 years of DDI compliant software, 5 years ago there was a handful, now there's probably 30 odd bits of software, including some ERP related software in there, but by and large most of them are software as a service, cloud based. Certainly the more mature, the more globally scalable versions of DD software are cloud-based. You don't need to change your ERP to get at this functionality, to get at the benefits. And that's quite an important thing, And last couple of things on IT. There may well be some conflict in IT. So usually in a large company, there are many projects in flight at any given time. And some of them may have conflict or contradict some of the objectives you want to resolve by going demand driven. So be aware that you've got to understand what's happening in the IT landscape, but also there are some myths and misunderstandings around how cloud works, how software as a service works, and myths around what you can actually do inside an ERP environment or not. So a lot to think about in the IT space. The other thing, probably unlike this conference, because you're all here because you want to hear about this one topic, but if you have had the pleasure of going to any number of the supply chain conferences that run in different countries, continents, over the last sort of 12, 24 months, the amount of hype overload in those conferences is simply staggering. Whether you're being battered by the wonders of blockchain or some funky new version of analytics, but some word in front of analytics, predictive or something else. There's new ways of doing analytics happening all the time. You've got other things in here. You'll recognise the icons, and almost all big consulting companies are operating in all of these spaces simultaneously. As a supply chain leader, it's quite difficult to pick your way through that if there's one voice in here that's saying demand driven, demand driven, demand driven, amongst blockchain, machine learning, AI, cognitive, predictive. All of these things are competing for leadership attention, and they are also competing for the fairly scarce resources to invest in these things. So it's really clear from this that you've got to be very, very credible. This has got to be about results, not just being about jumping on the next cool bandwagon. You would be staggered as to how many companies you can speak to who have got a blockchain department still trying to figure out what it's trying to do. I knew of one. I wouldn't dare to mention where it was, but I knew of one. Created, sucked in resources, didn't actually know what it was trying to do. It's a crazy situation. Why? Because there's a fear of missing out. I must be doing something in this space. I must have some analytics. I must have some machine learning and all that. It's a genuine problem in supply chain, and I think we in supply chain don't help ourselves sometimes with that. So we should be clear. We should be clear what results, what problems are we trying to resolve here. So be aware of hype overload. Case for change. So we've managed to get demand driven as a topic sort of through the noise of the hype and all of the other stuff. We've now got some time, airtime with the business, and we need to make a case for change. And I was just in another session, and it was very much the same sort of approach here, that the only way through this to break the hype sort of fallacy is to go for facts and data, go for benefits. And in Shell, I did this with SmartChain's help via a series of very detailed simulations. I didn't know enough about how demand-driven worked myself to do it. I was fairly nifty on Excel, but I didn't know enough. So I got some help, and we ran some very detailed simulations, one for all of North America. That got some very good results, very, very good results. But the GM for Europe and the GM for Asia both said, when they saw the results for North America, you can guess what they said. There you go, we're different. We're different. My supply chain is different in Asia than the North America one. North America is one country. You've got all your warehouses in one sort of location, you don't have to go across any sea to get there, all the usual stuff. So I did 2 more simulations. I simulated somewhere in Europe, in Belgium, which was a challenging supply chain, different product base. And I also did Hong Kong, which was a very networked location. So containerized quantities, big MOQs, long lead times, shipping, lots of network distribution. So really tested whether the transition would work everywhere. I wasn't really interested in just implementing in France or just implementing in Houston. That'd be great for France or Houston, but it wouldn't really answer the group level challenges of the top-down pressure on the bottom line for the group. So be specific where you're tackling, test it, validate it, make sure that you get some help to understand enough about how this works so that you can see in your business whether in all locations of your business at the group level, is this going to work? Because you don't really want to make a change and find that it only works for half of your business. Because that means you're going to start having 2 sets of processes for those that can do it and for those that can't do it. The chances are there are very, very few businesses really that we've come across that you can't apply demand-driven pull techniques across the business in some shape or form. The benefit will vary. The benefit we found varied anywhere from, say, a 10% improvement in inventory on things like some raw materials and the additives. It turns out they were being managed very, very well, even in traditional methods using Excel spreadsheets just in time and so on, up to 50, 55, 60% benefit in other areas of the supply chain. So understanding where your benefit lies, understanding that helps you to understand the kind of transition you need to make to get that benefit. When you make a business case, somebody's not going to write a blank check on a global scale in a multinational company to go off and do this. You don't get blank checks for this. So costing and planning, so planning comes before cost actually. Plan how you're going to do it. And I'll come back to a little bit about planning later on. But make sure you've got an idea of the cost. Don't ask for $2 million to do it, knowing that that's never enough, and go back and ask for another 2 million a year later and another 2 million, because that's just going to annoy your leadership, because that's going to say you didn't know what you were doing. In my experience, certainly in Shell, it was far better to be upfront saying, we need X amount of money to run this program through the full change management. That's the IT build, that's the education, the training, the program management, the resources, the travel, because you will have to go to these locations to make this transition happen. You can't just phone people up and say, go to demand driven, please. It simply doesn't work that way. But ultimately, the bottom line is always focus on what the return on that investment is. And in the Shell example, the return on investment was simply staggering. In terms of what you put in to what you get out, that ROI was staggering. And in the change management part of that, in fact, it was too staggering. It was just too unbelievable. So I actually started trimming the business case down just to get it to be not quite so unbelievable. But the benefits are really there, and it's worth going through a case for change exercise.